Hello, everybody. We are the Critiqueadors. I'm your host, Max Sacconi, and these are my co-hosts. If you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Go first. Femi, Ishola.
I'm
Yeah,
Michael Bessler.
And I'm Julia Chihovsky, everybody.
Woo!
Awesome. Wow, what a star-studded cast we have here. Today, we have watched a little movie called Parallel Mothers, and it is a Spanish film. It is completely in the Spanish language as well. To begin in our analysis into this film, this wonderful body of work, we're going to start by going into the Spanish film history. So it's like overall film history of movies from Spain. Any of you like to start this?
I got this part covered. So in
Go.
recent years, Spanish cinema has achieved a lot of high marks and recognition. It's had a long history filled with a bunch of great filmmakers, but it didn't get international appeal until the 1980s. Now, the first films that were released in Spain and in Spanish there's actually a fun little debate in between which movie was actually first released. So the debate is between I won't even attempt this name in Spanish, but it's called Exit of the 12 O'Clock Mass from the Church of El Pilar of Zaragoza. By Eduardo Gimo Pedro Matra. And I'm sorry for butchering any of this. Spanish is not my second language. And then the other movie was Paza of the Port of Barcelona, which was by Alexandra Promilio. Or it could also be ambiguous. There's also another film that was also released, but most historians don't mark it. So those are the first films to achieve even any notoriety that were made in Spain and were filmed in the Spanish language. But there was a huge event that we will continuously talk about that shaped Spanish cinema as we know it. And of course, that is the Spanish Civil War. The film industry went from being all about art and art form and art expression and to being used for propaganda. Both sides of the world war used film to promote themselves, discredit the opponent, and censor unwanted information during the Spanish-American War. So when the Spanish film industry was built on being full and true to your craft, it became now just propaganda to pump the streets full of lies and deceptions for all the people. Censorship was a huge problem during this time because it was heavily imposed by the Franco regime. Because of this, a lot of the movies and directors suffered under the censorship, and all non-Spanish language movies were dubbed into Spanish or banned. So it was basically not a good time for anyone. But after the death of Franco, Spain moved towards democracy. And in this new form and new wave, their films exploded with freedom of the directors to do whatever they wanted, to talk about controversial topics, and they were able to become a full-blown industry and started exploding until the 1980s, where they became globally recognized.
That was very informative, Mike.
Very lovely.
Yes,
Thank you. Thanks,
so
guys.
educated listening to you. Going off of that, as we breach in closer to our film, I'd like to ask, what do you guys know about Pedro Almodóvar, the director of the film?
I did research on our little filmmaker. So with the birth name as Pedro Almodóvar Caballero, I didn't take Spanish for a long time, so I apologize. He was born in a small town of Calzadava de Calatrava in the impoverished Spanish region of La Mancha. Do I know where that is on the map? Absolutely not. But he arrived in Madrid in 1968 and survived by selling used items in a flea market. He couldn't go to film school because, as previously mentioned, the filmmaking schools were shut down by the government, and also because he just didn't have enough money. So instead, he found a job at a phone company and he saved his salary to buy himself a camera. And then for 6 years, from 1972 to 1978, he just like made little short films with his films. And then the premieres of those early films were famous in the growing world of the Spanish counterculture. So, as a result, he became a star of La Movida, which is a pop culture movement in the late 70s in Madrid, which basically just like talks about like, um, like transitioning from democracy after the dictatorship to like having more freedom and everything. And then in 1978, him and his brother Agustin Almodóvar established their own production company, El Deso, which is still continues on today, I believe. And his phenomenon has reached all over the world, and his films are very popular. So he's very internationally acclaimed. And also, some trademarks, which we do see in the film, is that one, he often uses symbolism and metaphorical techniques to portray circular storylines, so everything wraps up in together, and that his films often portray strong female characters and transsexuals. I don't think transsexuals were shown in the film, but definitely our two female leads were definitely strong female characters and very independent for themselves.
Mm-hmm. True. Stemming off of that, like, we've had the whole Spanish film history, and the big factor leading into it was the Spanish Civil War, and how it affected Pedro Almodóvar very much. I'd like to talk about the political context and subtext that are within and surrounding the film. So, to go off of the Spanish Civil War, which lasted from 1936 to 1939, it was a war between the Republicans and the Nationalists. The Republicans were more left-leaning sides or moderate political on the agenda, and the Nationalists were very strong conservatives, as far right-wing as possible, and fascists. And among the Nationalists was a man named Francisco Franco. Might be mispronouncing that, but he rose to prominence for the Nationalist side, and when the Nationalist side ended up winning this civil war, he established something called the Franco regime, which was a conservative fascist state, and Francisco Franco became a term called Cadillo, which was essentially dictatorship of the newly named Spanish state. Now, this war was heavily covered up and not really explored historically, because there were mass graves, like one including the Valley of the Fallen, where it's about a 10,000 person grave that Franco had made to, quotation marks, you can't see it, but I'm giving quotation marks, honor the dead that he himself had killed and terrorized, basically. This regime lasted from 1939 all the way to 1975. Only at his death did it stop. And when Francisco died, actually, he was buried in the Valley of the Fallen with all the people that he had terrorized. So it's kind of some poetic irony or justice, which one you'd like to say.
Full circle moment.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Almodóvar loves to do. And then, how does this apply to the film? That is, the film is heavily lined with political subtext, especially concerning the arc about how Annis wants to uncover her ancestors' bones from one of the mass grave sites during the Civil War. Now, political subtext here is that the Spanish has become a democracy ever since the Francisco regime ended in 1975. There is a higher level of conservative power now in the government, and people have now fear that things might return to the old way. So, Almodóvar, understanding the horrid history there, he had felt to all up to like the horrid crimes that happened during this period, and by displaying it in narrative through the grave site, exactly, and especially with the ending shot where archaeologists who had dug up the bones for the families that wished to bury their remains properly, they were now laying in the same mass grave pile. And this is representative of how they had covered up these mass graves and mass killings, essentially, and that if conservative fascists return to power in such prominent levels, then this will happen again. It'll be cyclical, essentially, just like Almodóvar loves to talk about, as you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm. I was also gonna mention that, like, as he's trying to portray, like, the Spanish Civil War, I feel like that, resembles more closely with the talk that, Janice and Anya had, where they're talking about it, and she was talking about how, like, Anya was talking to Janice about how she's too obsessed with, trying to find the graves again, and I feel like that kinda portrays, like, how especially because like, we're all, like, young adults and, like, some of the problems that occurred in the past we might not find relevant today, but as we've seen, like in history books, like history tends to repeat itself if you don't educate yourself on it. So I feel like Janice like kind of educating
Exactly.
like Anna to like take a side and to kind of like like dive into like the cultures like in like her history to kind of just like show that like even though it didn't matter then, it's always gonna return if you don't learn about it. So I just found that very interesting. Like kind of his like little warning to like the Spanish youth.
It's a great way to convey that message, especially through narrative, where it's easier to intake and is entirely more palatable.
Mm-hmm.
There's other smaller things such as like gender politics, because the film definitely centers on women and their hardships, because
Mm-hmm.
all the male characters do not come without their massive flaws, especially
Absolutely.
few that ended up uh, in gang raping, as Anna reveals to us throughout the story, and like
Mm-hmm.
even Arturo is cheating on his cancer-ridden wife, which is
Yeah.
horrible,
Yeah.
and it ends up in Janice's pregnancy. So there's themes about women trying to take control of their own life, as they are the ones who are keeping the lineage moving on. As Janice
Mhm.
was raised by a single mother, who her mother was also raised by a single mother, so there's a kind of linear path, and it's like people kind of forget about the women and the roles that they have in the house, especially if they're the only ones around to do that for them.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely want to interject and say that this is 100% a feminist film, and
Oh yeah.
I
Mhm.
Yes.
I kind of was thinking by the end, I was like, wait, how many men did I actually see on the screen? And I only counted
Right.
one. Obviously, there aren't that many characters in general,
No.
besides from one character. I forgot his name. Starts with an A. I'm blanking on it right now.
Arturo.
Arturo?
Yes,
Arturo, yeah.
and besides from him and the picture of the other father of the other mother, I didn't really see any men, and I thought that was
Yeah.
definitely intentional and
Hmm.
something I peeped.
Mhm. Yeah, it might be due to, like because there is, like, no, parental figure, like, father figure for these girls, like, in their, like, their little girls. I feel like that's why it's, like, mainly, like, no men, and especially, like, in the house that Janice lives in, it's, like I'm not sure if, like, it's more like an apartment complex, but it is, like, all women. It's, like, the woman around the house, I forgot her name, but also, like, the Spanish not Spanish, the Irish, like, babysitter for an exchange student girl, like,
Hmm.
that's, like, the only, like, women we see as well, besides, like, Anna's mom or whatever.
It's a
This
very small cast.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lot of our he said that he identifies more with matriarchs and patriarchs. It's something about
Mm.
like it feels like there's more character there for him, so that's why he more commonly portrays these in his films.
Let me go into some of the stats, then we can go into some
General
of our
discussion.
opinions on the movie overall.
Yeah.
So, released on December 24th, haha, one day before Christmas, at the end of 2021, it grossed in 2.3 or 2.4 million dollars in the box office, and for not being a blockbuster film, that is pretty good. It won. It was nominated for a bunch of awards, like so many awards. Like I don't want to list them all, but one important one I would say was the Golden
Mm.
Globe Awards, and they were nominated for best foreign language film and also for best original score. So that has to do with more of the composer, and then
Mm.
also nominated for Hollywood Music and Media Awards. So more score stuff. But there's so many other awards. The actress Penelope Cruz was nominated for so many. It didn't actually win all that many awards, but the nominations are pretty noteworthy, I would say.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
It was rated a 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is, I think,
Okay.
the toughest critique, like overall.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm
usually
not sure
it
about
is.
that, but I think it is. And rated 4 out of 5 on Empire Online, and then 7.1 out of 10 on IMDb.
Mm.
So overall, pretty good ratings, considering again not a blockbuster film. And I think it did really well for. I think it made a name for itself. It's actually in a list of a bunch of top tens, American critics top 10 lists for the best film of 2021.
Mhm.
And it was like rated like the second best film by like some noteworthy critics, and then the fourth best film by a bunch of noteworthy critics, and that's just crazy stats. They just pulled.
Yeah, it speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think made this film so noteworthy to especially world audience, which is much grander than just Spain itself, where it seems like a very culturally specific movie, or it is
It
heavily ingrained with the history of Spain and whatnot. How do you guys think that applies to such bigger markets and to rack so many awards and nominations like that?
I think a big factor is relatability.
Mhm.
Even if there is language barriers in a film or say like cultural differences in a film, if you tell a story like this one about these mothers, it's relatable. It's something that I bet all of us could pull something from the film that somehow is related to our own lives. And I think that's why it has such a greater reach.
Mhm. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, a common phrase that I often say is, like, human beings everywhere don't have a unique experience, and it's not, like, in a bad way. It's just, like, everyone kind of experiences the same things no matter where you are, so definitely
Mm,
relatability, but also I feel like, with the influence of the Spanish Civil War, even though it mainly does pertain to like, Spain's history, I feel like just manipulate the country, like, where the movie's taking place, and you'll still find, like, some sort of tragic human event that people still feel the repercussions of today. So, like,
yeah,
even though it's set in Spain, like, if I even put it to, like, my culture, I could still definitely, like, make a film that's similar, and it would still, like, hit home.
yeah,
I feel like it doesn't, like, going off of it. I agree with all that you guys have said so far, and like it doesn't overcomplicate its cultural influence. It kind of weaves it in naturally to where you don't need to know every single little detail about the Spanish Civil War in order to understand conflicts that these characters are having, because it still grounds itself in personal character development, which I personally love. I
Mhm.
also loved how it weaved political story into a relatively simple, on paper at least, a conflict between two mothers who had birth at the same time, where their babies are swapped, and then oh, well, look at all this crazy conflict that we have now, right? I
Right.
thought it was brilliant that they weaved it in so tightly knit.
yeah. So well done. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. I believe that is all we have to talk about today. But I have one more question for you guys. Would you recommend this movie to somebody else?
Absolutely. I don't see why not.
I definitely would. I personally was never a fan of watching movies in another language. I don't
You're
like,
missing out.
and I have to
Yes.
say that changed for me with the Danish movie. So
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I've
Mm,
become more open, and it's nice to see that if I feel like I can become more open, other people can also do that. And for that reason, like plot aside, narrative aside, I would recommend it for that reason.
wow. Yeah, that's a way better explanation. I would just strongly recommend it. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed the film. I thought the performances were very strong, and I
Mhm.
thought that the contact within it, without spoiling it, is something to watch. It's a very powerful movie.
Yeah.
I would also recommend it now, and just everybody has my opinion, I guess. But no, I'd recommend it because it's a nice cultural education, not something you get to see every day, especially in such a palatable form like that. So,
Yeah. I feel like this would be the like, a movie that I would see in, like, high school, like, in my films, 'cause my classes like, my teacher is very dedicated to, like, learning about different cultures. I feel like this I would see this in class, and then, like, people would like it a lot.
Yeah.
well, the consensus seems to be that you guys should watch this movie. I'd like to thank you for tuning in. We are the Criticadors.
Doors.
And till next time.